And hello. I'm I'm here. So, watch as the camera adjusts. There we go. Auto adjust. We got you working. Hi everyone. It's time 8. I'm not snowed in yet. Give it time. I'm Mother Nature and God will do their thing. So, for those that follow my podcast, I'm sorry I didn't get an episode up, but it was a day off. I had multiple amounts of accounting and science homework to catch up with, so I used today to do that. I normally record episodes, and I usually get them in a timely fashion, but stuff happens. That's the way she goes. Alright. And it looks like I'm up and running. So, enough of the excuses. Considering I'm going to be snowed in probably the next couple of days, maybe. Adjust my glasses of reading. There we go. Adjust my glasses of reading. I get a plus on that one, they say. I don't know if it makes me any better of a reader or what it does. Probably helps me not to be so bleeding blind either. The small miracles, we has them. So, I did promise you we're about to end the Voyages. You're wondering, this shirt that I have is a prank shirt from the days that I was a bum at the local cigar shop. Hope everyone's amused with it. And, much like Rabbit, I have my tea. There we go. All right. And now we get to the last 3 voyages. Yeah, 3 voyages. We're on number 5. So let's get headlong into it, shall we? Not even all that I had gone through could make me contented with a quiet life. I soon wearied of its pleasures and longed for change and adventure. Therefore I set out once more, but this time on a ship of my own, which I built and fitted out at the nearest seaport. I wished to be able to call at whatever port I choose, taking my own time, but as I did not intend carrying enough goods for a full cargo, I invited several merchants of several different nations to join me. We set sail with the first favorable wind. Excuse me. And after a long voyage upon the open seas, we landed upon an unknown island, which proved to be uninhabited. We determined, however, to explore it, but had not gone far when we found a roc's egg. As large as the one I had seen before, and evidently very nearly hatched. For the beak of the young bird had already pierced the shell. In spite of all I could say to deter them, the merchants who were with me fell upon it with their hatchets, breaking the shell and killing the young roc, then lighting a fire upon the ground from which they hacked morsels from the bird, and proceeded to roast them while I stood by aghast. Scarcely had they finished their ill-omened repast, when the air above was darkened by two mighty shadows. The captain of my ship, knowing by experience what this meant, cried out to us that the parent birds were coming, and urged us to get on board with all speed. This we did, and the sails were hoisted, but before we had made any way, the rooks had reached their despoiled nest and hovered about it, uttering frightful cries when they discovered the mangled remains of their young one. For a moment we lost sight of them, and were flattering ourselves that we had escaped, when they reappeared and soared into the air directly over our vessel, and we each saw that held in its claws were an immense rock ready to crush us. There was a moment of breathless suspense, and then one bird loosed its hold, and the huge block of stone hurtled through the air. But thanks to the presence of mind of the helmsman, who turned our ship violently in another direction, it fell into the sea close beside us, cleaving it asunder till we could nearly see the bottom. We hardly had time to draw a breath of relief before the other rock fell with a mighty crash right in the midst of our luckless vessel, smashing it into 1,000 fragments and crushing or hurling into the sea passengers and crew. I myself went down with the rest, but had the good fortune to rise unhurt, and by holding onto a piece of driftwood with one hand and swimming with the other, I kept myself afloat and was presently washed up by the tide to an island. Its shores were steep and rocky, but I scrambled up safely and threw myself down to rest upon the green turf. When I had somewhat recovered, I began to examine the spot in which I found myself, and truly it seemed to me that I had reached a garden of delights. There were trees everywhere, and they were laden with flowers and fruit, while a crystal stream wandered in and out under their shadow. When night came, I slept sweetly in a cozy nook, though the remembrance that I was alone in a strange land made me sometimes start up and look around me in alarm. Then I wished heartily that I had stayed at home at ease. However, the morning sunlight restored my courage, and I once more wandered among the trees, but always with some anxiety as to what I might see next. I had penetrated some distance into the island when I saw an old man bent and feeble sitting upon the river bank. At first I took him to be some shipwrecked mariner, like myself. Going up to him, I greeted him in a friendly way, but he only nodded his head at me in reply. I then asked what he did there, and he made signs to me that he wished to get across the river to gather some fruit, and seemed to be begging me to carry him on his back. Pitying his age and feebleness, I took him up, and wading across the stream, I bent down so he might more easily reach the bank, and made him to get down, but instead of allowing himself to be set upon his feet, even now, it makes me laugh, come to think of it. This creature, it seemed to me so decrepit, leaped nimbly upon my shoulders, hooking his legs around my neck, and gripped me so lightly that I was well nigh choked. And so overcome with terror, when I fell insensible to the ground, when I recovered, my enemy was still in his place, although he had released his hold enough to allow me breathing space. And seeing me revived, he prodded me adroitly, first with one foot and then the other, until I was forced to get up and stagger about with him under the trees while he gathered and ate the choicest fruits. This went on all day, and even at night, when I threw myself down, half dead with weariness, the terrible old man held on tight to my neck, nor did he fail to greet the first glimmer of light by drumming upon me with his heels, until I perforce awoke and resumed my journey march with rage and bitterness in my heart. It happened one day that I passed under a tree which lay several dry gourds, and catching one, up, I amused myself with scooping out its contents and pressing it into the juice of several bunches of grapes which hung from every bush. When it was full, I left it propped in the fork of a tree, and a few days later, carrying the hateful old man that way, I snatched it at my gourd and passed as I passed it, and had the satisfaction of a draught of excellent wine so good that and refreshing I even forgot my detestable burden, and began to sing and caper. The old monster was not slow to perceive the effect of much my draught had produced, and then I carried him more lightly than usual. So he stretched out his skinny hand, and seizing the gourd, first tasted its contents cautiously, then drained them to the last drop. The gourd was strong, the wine was strong, and the gourd capacious. So he began to sing after a fashion, and soon I had the delight of feeling the iron grip of his goblin legs unclasp. And with one vigorous effort, I threw him to the ground, from which he never moved again. I was so rejoiced to have at last got rid of this uncanny old man that I ran leaping and bounding down to the seashore, where, by the greatest good luck, I met with some mariners who had anchored off the island to enjoy the delicious fruits and to renew their supply of water. They heard of the story of my escape with amazement, saying, "How you fell into the hands of the old man of the sea. And it is a mercy that he did not strangle you, as he has done everyone else upon whose shoulders he's managed to perch himself. This island is well known as the scene of his evil deeds, and no merchant or sailor who lands upon it cares to stray far away from his comrades. After we had talked for a while, they took me back to their ship with them, where the captain received me kindly, and as soon as we set sail, after several days, we reached a large and prosperous-looking town where all the houses were built of stone. Here we anchored, and one of the merchants, who had been very friendly to me on the way, took me ashore and showed me a lodging set apart for strange merchants. He then provided me with a large sack and pointed me to a party of others, equipped in a like manner. "Go with them," said he, "and do as they do, but beware of losing sight of them, for if you strayed, your life would be in danger." With that, he supplied me with provisions and bade me farewell, and I set out with my new companions. I soon learnt the object of our expedition was to fill our sacks with coconuts, and when at length I saw the trees and noted their immense height and slippery smoothness of their slender trunks, I did not understand at all how we were to do it. The crowns with the cocoa palms were all alive with monkeys, big and little, which skipped from one to the other with surprising agility, seeming to be curious about us and disturbed at our appearance. I was at first surprised when my companions, after collecting stories, began to throw them at the lively creatures, which seemed to me quite harmless. For soon I saw the reason of it and joined them heartily, for the monkeys, annoyed and wishing to pay us back in our own coin, began to tear the nuts from the trees and cast them at us with angry and spiteful gestures, so that after very little labor our sacks were filled with the fruit which we could have not otherwise obtained. As soon as we had as many as we could carry, we went back to the town, where my friend bought my share and advised me to continue the same occupation until I had earned enough money to carry me to my own country. This I did, and before long had amassed a considerable sum. Just then I heard there was a trading ship ready to set sail, and taking leave of my friend, I went on board, carrying with me a goodly store of coconuts, and we sailed to the first island where the pepper grows, and then to Kamari, where the best aloes wood is found, and where men drink no wine by an unalterable law. Here I exchanged my nuts for pepper and good aloes wood, and went a fishing for pearls with some of the other merchants. And my divers were so lucky that I very soon had an immense number. And those were very large and perfect. With these treasures, I came joyfully back to Baghdad, where I disposed of them for large sums of money, of which I did not fail as before to give the 10th part to the poor, and after that I rested from my labors and comforted myself with all the pleasures that my riches could give me. Having ended this story, Sinbad ordered that 100 sequins should be given to Hindbad, and the guests then withdrew. But after the next day's feast, he began the account of his 6th voyage, as follows. It must be a marvel, after having 5 times met with shipwreck and unheard of perils, I could again tempt fortune and risk fresh trouble. I am even surprised myself when I look back. But evidently, it was my fate to rove. And after a year of repose, I prepared to make a 6th voyage. Regardless of the entreaties of my friends and relations who did all they could to keep me home. Instead of going by the Persian Gulf, I traveled a considerable way overland, and disembarked from a distant Indian port with a captain who meant to make a long voyage. And truly he did so, for we fell in stormy weather, which drove us completely off our course. So that for many days neither captain nor pilot knew where we were, nor where we were going. When they did at last discover our position, we had small ground for rejoicing, for the captain, casting his turban upon the deck and tearing his beard, declared that we were in the most dangerous spot upon the whole sea, which had been caught by a current which was at that moment sweeping us into destruction. It was too true. In spite of all the sailors could do, we were driven towards a frightful rapidity towards the foot of a mountain, which rose sheer out of the sea, and our vessel was dashed to pieces upon the rocks at its base. Not, however, until we had managed to scramble on shore, carrying with us the most precious of our possessions. When we had done this, the captain said to us, "Now here we are, we may as well begin to dig our graves at once, since from this fatal spot no shipwrecked mariner has ever returned." This speech discouraged us much, and we began to lament over our sad fate. The mountain formed the seaweed boundary of a large island, and a narrow strip of rocky shore upon which was strewn with the wreckage of 1,000 gallant ships, while the bones of the luckless mariners shone white in the sunshine, and we shuddered to think how soon our own would be added to the heap. Around all, too, lay vast quantities of the costliest merchandise, and treasures were heaped in every cranny of the rocks. But all these things added only to the desolation of the scene. It struck me as a very strange thing that a river of clear fresh water, which gushed from the mountain not far from where we stood, instead of flowing into the sea as many rivers generally do, turned off sharply and flowed out of sight under a natural archway of rock. And when I went to examine it more closely, I found that inside the cave the walls were thick with diamonds and rubies, and masses of crystal, and the floor was strewn with ambergris. Here, then, upon this desolate shore, we abandoned ourselves to our fate, for there was no possibility of scaling the mountain, and if a ship had appeared, it could have only shared our doom. The first thing our captain did was to divide equally among us the food we possessed, and then the length of each man's depend on the last time he could make his portion last. I, myself, could live upon very little. Nevertheless, by the time I had been buried, the last By the time I had buried the last of my companions, when my sack of provisions was so small that I hardly thought I should live long enough to dig my own grave, which I set about doing. While I regretted bitterly the roving disposition which was always bringing me into such straits, and thought longingly of the comfort and luxury that I had left. But luckily for me, the fancy took me to stand once more beside the river, where it plunged out of sight into the depths of the cavern. So scratched. As I did so, an idea struck me. This river, which hid itself underground, doubtless, emerged again at some distant spot. So why should I not build a raft and trust myself to its swiftly flowing waters? If I perished before I could reach the light of day once more, I should be no worse off than I was now. For death stared me into the face, and while there was always the possibility as I was born under a lucky star, I might find myself safe and sound in some desirable land. I decided at any rate to risk it, and speedily built myself a stout raft of driftwood with strong cords, of which enough would to spare my lay strewn upon the beach. I then made up many packages of rubies, emerald, and rock crystal, ambergris, and precious stuffs, and mounted them upon my raft, being careful to preserve the balance. And then I seated myself upon it, having 2 small oars that I had fashioned laid ready to my hand, and loosed the cord which held it to the bank. Once out into the current, my raft flew swiftly under the gloomy archway, and I found myself in total darkness, carried smoothly forward by the rapid river. On it went it seemed to me, for many nights and days. Once the channel had become so small that I had a narrow escape of being crushed against the rocky roof. And after that I took the precaution of lying flat upon my precious bales. Though I only ate what was absolutely necessary to keep myself alive, the inevitable moment came when, after swallowing my last morsel of food, I began to wonder if I must, after all, die of hunger. Then, worn out with anxiety and fatigue, I fell into a deep sleep. And when I opened my eyes, I was once more upon the light of day. A beautiful country lay before me, and my raft, which was tied to the river bank, was surrounded by friendly-looking black men. I rose and saluted them, and they spoke to me in return, but I could not understand a word of their language. Feeling perfectly bewildered by my sudden return to life and light, I murmured to myself in my Arabic, "Close thine eyes, and while thou sleepest, heaven will change thy fortune from evil to good." One of the natives who understood this tongue came forward, saying, "My brother, be not surprised to see us. This is our land, and as we came to get water from the river, we noticed your raft floating down upon it. And one of us swam out and brought you to the shore. We have waited for your awakening. Now tell us now whence you come, and why were you going that dangerous way?" I replied nothing would please me more than to tell them, but that I was starving, and I would fain eat something first. Well, I was supplied with all I needed. Having satisfied my hunger, I told them faithfully that all that had befallen me. They were lost in my wonder at my tale when it was interpreted to them, and said my adventures so surprising must be related to their king, only by the man whom they had happened. So, procuring a horse They mounted me upon it, and we set out, carrying my raft just as it was upon their shoulders. In this order we marched on to the city of Serendib, where the natives presented me to their king, whom I saluted in the Indian fashion, prostrating himself at his feet and kissing the ground, but the monarch bade me rise and sit beside him. He asked me first what was my name. I am Sinbad, I replied, whom men call the sailor, for I have voyaged upon many seas. And how come you here? Asked the king. I told my story, concealing nothing, and to his surprise and delight were so great he ordered my adventures be written in letters of gold, and laid up in the archives of his kingdom. And presently my raft was brought in, and the bales opened in his presence, and the king declared that in all of his treasury there were no such rubies and emeralds such as those that lay in great heaps before him. Seeing that he looked at them with interest, I ventured to say myself that all that I had were at his disposal. But he answered me, smiling, Nay, Sinbad, heaven forbid that I should cover your riches. I will rather add to them. For I desire that you shall not leave my kingdom without some tokens of goodwill. He then commanded his officers to provide me with a suitable lodging at his expense, and sent slaves to wait upon me to carry my raft and my bales to my new dwelling place. You may imagine that I praised his generosity and gave him grateful thanks. Nor did I fail to present myself daily in his audience chamber, and for the rest of my time I assumed myself in seeing all that was most worthy of attention in the city. The island of Serendib, being situated on the equinoctial line. So for those wondering, it's right on the equator. It's probably either going to be Sri Lanka or Madagascar, if you want an approximate. The days and nights there are of equal length. The chief city is placed at the end of a beautiful valley, formed by the highest mountain in the world, which is in the middle of the island. I had the curiosity to ascend to its very summit, for this was the place to which Adam was banished out of paradise. So, maybe Madagascar. We're not sure. Here are found rubies and many precious things, and rare plants that grow abundantly, with cedar trees and cocoa palms. On the seashore, at the mouths of the rivers, the divers seek for pearls, and in some valleys, diamonds are plentiful. After many days, I petitioned the king that I might return to my own country, to which he graciously consented. Moreover, he loaded me with rich gifts, and when I went to take leave of him, he entrusted me with a royal present, and a letter to the commander of the faithful, our servant Lord, saying, I pray you give these to Caliph Harun al-Rashid, and assure him of my friendship. So, this is important, the letter. It's an ambassadorial duty, and Sinbad takes it. I accepted the charge respectfully, and soon embarked upon the vessel which the king himself had chosen for me. The king's letter was written in blue characters upon a rare and precious skin of yellowish color. And these were the words upon it, the king of the Indies, before whom walk 1,000 elephants, who lives in a palace, which the roof blazes with 100 rubies, and whose treasure contains 20,000 diamond crowns. To the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, sends greeting. Though the offering we present to you is unworthy of your notice, we pray you accept it as a mark of the esteem and the friendship which we cherish for you, and of which we gladly send you this token. And we ask of you a like regard if you deem us worthy of it. Adieu, brother. The present consisted of a vase carved from a single ruby, 6 inches high and as thick as my finger. This was filled with the choicest pearls, large and of a perfect shape and luster, and secondly a huge snakeskin, or scales as large as a sequin, which would preserve from sickness those who slept upon it, and then quantities of aloes wood, camphor, and pistachio nuts, and lastly a beautiful slave girl whose robes glittered with precious stones. After a long and prosperous voyage, we landed out at Balsora, and taking the king's letter, I presented myself at the palace gate, followed by the beautiful slaves, and the various members of my own family bearing the treasure. As soon as I had declared my errand, I was conducted into the presence of the Caliph. After I had made my obeisance, I gave the letter and the king's gift, for which he had examined, and demanded of me whether the prince of the Serendib was indeed really as rich and powerful as he claimed to be. Commander of the faithful, I replied, bowing humbly before him, I can assure that your majesty that he has in no way exaggerated his wealth and grandeur. Nothing can equal the magnificence of his palace. When he goes abroad, his throne is prepared on the back of an elephant, and either side of him ride his ministers, his favorites, and his courtiers. On the elephant's neck sits an officer, his golden lance in his hand, and behind him stands another bearing a pillar of gold, at the top which is an emerald as long as my hand. 1,000 men in cloth of gold, mounted richly upon richly garrisoned elephants, go before him. There we go, I had to read that. And as the procession moves onward, the officer who guides the elephant cries aloud, "Behold the mighty monarch, the powerful and valiant Sultan of the Indies, whose palace is covered with 100,000 rubies, who possesses 20,000 diamond crowns. Behold a monarch greater than Solomon, and mirage in their glory." Then one who stands behind the throne answers, "This king, so great and powerful, must die, must die, must die." And the first takes up the chant again, "All praise to him who lives forevermore." Further, my lord, in Serendib, no judge is needed. For the king himself, his people come for justice. The Caliph was very well satisfied with my report. From the king's letter, I judged that he was a wise man. It seems he is worthy of his people, and his people of him. So saying, he dismissed me with rich presents, and I returned to peace in my own house. When he had done speaking, his guests withdrew, and Hindbad had receiving 100 sequins, but all returned the next day to hear the story of the seventh voyage. All right, let me take a drink. We're going to get into the very last voyage of Sinbad. After my sixth voyage, I was quite determined that I would go to sea no more. I was now of an age to appreciate a quiet life, and I had run risks enough. I only wished to end my days in peace. One day, however, while I was entertaining a number of my friends, I was told an officer of the Caliph wished to speak to me. And when he was admitted, he bade me to follow him into the presence of Harun al-Rashid, which I accordingly did. After I had saluted him, the Caliph said, "I have sent for you, Sinbad, because I need of your services. I have chosen you to bear a letter and a gift to the king of the Serendib in return for his message of friendship. The Caliph's commandment fell upon me like a thunderbolt. Commander of the faithful, I answered, I am ready to do all that your majesty commands, but I humbly pray to you to remember that I am utterly disheartened by the unheard sufferings that I have undergone. I have indeed made a vow never again to leave Baghdad. With this I gave him a long account of some of my strangest adventures, to which he listened patiently. I admit, said he, that you have indeed had some extraordinary experiences, but I do not see why they should hinder you from doing as I wish. You only have to go to Serendib and give my message, and then you are free to come back. And do as you will, of course, but go you must. My honor and dignity command it. Seeing that there was no help for it, I declared myself willing to obey, and the Caliph, delighted at getting his own way, gave me 1,000 sequins for the expenses. For the expenses of the voyage, of course. I was soon ready to start, and taking the letter and the present, I embarked at Valsora and sailed quickly and safely to Serendib. Here, when I had disclosed my errand, I was well received and brought into the presence of the king, who greeted me with joy. "Welcome, Sinbad," he cried. "I have thought of you often and rejoiced to see you once more." After thanking him for the honor that he did me, I displayed the Caliph's gifts. First, a bed with complete hangings of all cloth of gold, which cost 1,000 sequins, and another like to it of crimson stuff, 50 robes of rich embroidery, 100 of the finest white linen from Cairo, Suez, Kufa, and Alexandria. Then more beds of a different fashion, and an agate vase, art with the figure of a man aiming an arrow at a lion, and finally a costly table, which had once belonged to King Solomon. The king of Serendib received with satisfaction in the assurance of the Caliph's friendliness towards him. And now my task being accomplished, I was anxious to depart, but it was some time before the king would think of letting me go. At last, however, he dismissed me with many presents. I lost no time on going aboard a ship, which I sailed at once, and for 4 days all went well. On the 5th day, we had the misfortune to fall in with pirates who seized our vessel, killing all who resisted, and making prisoners of those who were prudent enough to submit at once, of whom I was one. When they had despoiled us of all we possessed, they forced us to put on vile raiment, and sailing us to a distant island, were there sold us for slaves. I fell into the hands of a rich merchant, who took me home with him, and clothed and fed me well. And after some days sent for me and questioned me as to what I could do. I answered that I was a rich merchant who had been captured by pirates, and therefore I knew no trade. "Tell me," said he, "can you shoot a bow?" I replied that this had been one of the pastimes of my youth, and that doubtless with practice my skill would come back to me. Upon this he provided me with a bow and arrows, and mounting me with him upon his own elephant, took me to a vast forest, which lay far from the town. When we had reached the wildest part of it, we stopped, and my master had said to me, "This forest swarms with elephants. Hide yourself in the great tree, and shoot at all that pass you. When you have succeeded in killing one, come and tell me." So saying, he gave me a supply of food and returned to the town. And I perched myself high up in the tree and kept watch. That night I saw nothing, but just after sunrise the next morning, a large herd of elephants came crashing and trampling by. I lost no time in letting fly several arrows, and at last one of the great animals fell to the ground dead. The others retreated, leaving me free to come down from my hiding place and then run back to my master and tell of my success, for which I was praised and regaled. With good things. Then we went back to the forest together and dug a mighty trench in which we buried the elephant that I had killed, in order that when it became a skeleton my master might return and secure its tusks. For 2 months I hunted thus, and no day passed without my securing an elephant. Of course I did not always station myself in the same tree, but sometimes in one place, sometimes in another. One morning came, as I watched the coming of the elephants, and I was surprised to see that instead of passing the tree I was in as they usually did, they paused and completely surrounded it, trumpeting horribly and shaking the very ground with their heavy tread. And when I saw their eyes fixed upon me, I was terrified, and my arrows dropped from my trembling hand, and I had indeed good reason for my terror. When the largest of the animals wound his trunk around the stem of my tree, and with one mighty effort tore it up by the roots, bringing me to the ground entangled in its branches. I thought now that my last hour would surely come, but the huge creature, picking me up gently enough, set me upon its back, where I clung more dead than alive, followed by the whole herd, turned and crashed off into the dense forest. It seemed to me that I was once more set upon my feet by the elephant, and I stood as if in a dream watching the herd, which trampled off in another direction. We were soon hidden in the dense underwood. Then, recovering myself, I looked about me and found that I was standing upon the side of a great hill, strewn as far as I could see on either hand with the bones and the tusks of the elephants. Then this must be the elephants' burying place, I said to myself, and they must have brought me here so that I might cease to persecute them, seeing that I want nothing but their tusks, and here lie more than I could carry away in a lifetime. Whereas I turned and made for the city as far as I could go, as fast as I could go, not seeing a single elephant, by the way, which convinced me that they had retired deeper into the forest to leave the way open to Ivory Hill. And I did not know how to sufficiently admire their sagacity. After a day and a night, I reached my master's house and was received by him with joyful surprise. "Ah, poor Sinbad," he cried. "I was wondering what could have become of you. When I went to the forest, I found the tree newly uprooted, and arrows lying beside it, and I feared that I should never see you again. Pray tell me how you escaped death." I soon satisfied his curiosity, and the next day we went together to Ivory Hill, and he was overjoyed that I was to find that I was telling him nothing but the truth. When we had loaded our elephant with as many tusks as it could carry, and were on our way back to the city, he said, "My brother, since I can no longer treat a slave one who's enriched me thus, take your liberty, and may heaven prosper you. I will no longer conceal from you that these wild elephants have killed numbers of our slaves every year. No matter what good advice we gave them, they were caught sooner or later. You alone have escaped the wiles of these animals, and therefore you must be under the special protection of heaven. Now through you the whole town will be enriched without further loss of life. Therefore you shall not only receive your liberty, but I will bestow a fortune upon you." To which I replied, "Master, I do thank you for your, and I wish you all prosperity. For myself, I only ask the liberty to return to my own country." "It is well," he answered. "The monsoon will soon bring the ivory ships hither. Then I will send you on your way, with somewhat to pay your passage." So I stayed with him until the time of the monsoon, and every day we added to our store of ivory till all of his warehouses were overflowing with it. But by this time the other merchants knew the secret, but there was enough and to spare for all. When the ships at last arrived, my master himself chose the one which I was to sail, and put on board with me a great store of choice provisions, and also ivory in abundance, and all the costliest curiosities of the country, for which I could not thank him enough. And so we parted. I left the ship at the first port we came to, not feeling at ease upon the sea after what had happened to me by reason of it, and having disposed of my ivory for much gold, and bought many rare and costly presents, I loaded my pack animals and joined a caravan of merchants. Our journey was long and tedious, but I bore it patiently, reflecting, for at least I had not to fear tempests, nor pirates, nor serpents, nor any of the other perils from which I had suffered before. And at length we reached Baghdad. My first care was to present myself before the Caliph, and to give him an account of my embassy. He assured me that my long absence had disquieted him much, but he had nevertheless had hope for the best. As to my adventure among the elephants, he heard it with amazement, declaring that he could not have believed it, had it not my truthfulness been well known to him. By orders, this story and the others I had told him were written by his scribes in letters of gold, and laid upon among his treasures. I took my leave of him, well satisfied with the honors and the rewards he bestowed upon me, and since that time I have rested from my labors, and given myself wholly to my family and my friends. Thus Sinbad ended the story of the seventh and last voyage, and turning to Hindbad, he added, "Well, my friend, what do you think now? Have you heard of anyone who has suffered more, or had more narrow escapes than I have? Is it not just that I should know a life of ease and tranquility?" Hindbad drew near, kissing his hand respectfully, and replied, "Sir, you have indeed known fearful perils. My troubles have been nothing compared to yours. And, moreover, the generous use you make of your wealth proves that you deserve it. May you live long and happily in the enjoyment of it." Sinbad then gave him 100 sequins, and henceforth counted him among his friends. He also caused him to give up his profession as a porter, and to eat daily at his table, so that he all of his life may remember Sinbad the sailor. Well, the 7 voyages, as Sinbad had put it, even though he is in a life of luxury at this moment in the story of 1001 Arabian Nights, he earned every bit of it. And regardless of whatever anyone thinks, just consider one thing. One thing that stands out is every time Sinbad thought, all right, just a little more, I can get a little more. His last adventure, he didn't want to go, he had enough. If you notice the story of his voyages, 7, the godly number as they call it, the lucky number in Judeo-Christian and Muslim beliefs, 7. So, on his 7th voyage, he figured he was pushing his luck. And he did, but he returned safely to Baghdad. And all of his friends are now gathered around the table. not wanting, not waiting or wishing, and, to hear the tales of Sinbad the Sailor. I'm going to end this one pretty early now because even though it's 10 minutes till, this story is finished, but the Friday Night Fairy Tales will not finish. I will have to dig deep, deep, deep into my books. I've got plenty of fairy tales, though, so don't worry. We'll revisit 1001 Arabian Nights again sometime. I mean, it's a pretty dense book altogether. The one version I have is I've got many translations. But you can find me, though, on Twitter at BlueCollarJM. I also have a YouTube channel, Roulette Productions, I share with Bardic Ways. He's also, one of my dear friends. And to top it off, I do have a podcast called Blue Collar Philosophy. I usually run every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Also, I'm going to have another series coming up of stories. It will be coming up Saturday night, Sunday morning. I will give you an idea of that one. I am going to start that one with C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters that he had dedicated to J.R.R. Tolkien. That was suggested by the man who created the starting picture that you see here, Peter Niederbrock, also known as Nebel. And go check him out. I think P. Niederbrock is his name. I'll spell it if I have to one of these days, but go find him. Get you some art. Also, check out Bardic Ways and various other people that I might recommend. But that's the end of the tale, at least for tonight. Again, I'll have Screwtape Letters later on this weekend, and then headlong into War and Peace Tuesday night. Till then, take care, everyone.